In the quiet dawn of the medieval world, the land of Western Europe lies scarred by the long retreat of Rome. Its stone roads cracked, its forts hollowed by wind and silence. And beyond those fading borders, the Franks move through dense forests and river valleys as a people shaped by iron, soil, and survival, wrapped in wool and leather, their breath rising in the cold air as axes strike oak and hammers ring against glowing metal. These are not kings, yet not builders of empires, but families, bound by blood, oath, and memory, living close to the earth, where bread is baked over open fires, meat is salted for winter, and stories are spoken aloud. So they are never forgotten as the Rhine rolls dark and steady beside them. The old Roman world still watches, wary and weakened, while the Franks stand at its edge, learning from it, trading with it, fighting for it, and sometimes against it, carrying Roman coins beside tribal charms and wearing blades forged in their own smoke-filled sheds, while marching beneath banners they barely understand as mercenaries for an empire that no longer knows its own strength. And in these borderlands, a quiet transformation begins where Roman discipline meets Frankish ferocity, where wooden halls rise near abandoned stone and new lives take root in the ruins of old authority. Torchlight flickers against timber walls as elders speak of loyalty, courage, and land, while children learn to walk on frozen ground and warriors sharpen swords, not for glory, but for survival. And as winter winds howl through the trees and summer brings grain and blood in equal measure, the Franks grow accustomed to power without crowns and control without titles. Stepping slowly into spaces Rome has left behind, and though no one yet speaks of kingdoms or destiny, the earth itself seems to listen as hooves thunder across muddy paths and shields clash in forest clearings, because in this uncertain age, before Europe has a name, before faith and law are fully rewritten, the Franks are already shaping the future, simply by enduring, adapting, and standing firm where others fade. And as dawn breaks over mist-covered rivers and broken walls, it becomes clear that medieval Europe is not born in palaces or decrees, but in cold mornings, smoky halls, and the steady heartbeat of a people learning to rule without knowing it yet. As the centuries turn and the Franks step deeper into the vacuum left by Rome, power begins to gather around strong hands and sharper minds, and from the smoke of tribal halls emerges a new kind of leader, one who understands that survival alone is no longer enough, and that unity is the true weapon of the future. Warriors still clash in muddy fields, shields splinter, and iron sings. But now these battles carry purpose, as clans are drawn together, not only by blood, but by ambition and fear and hope, and the land itself seems to harden under their feet. Forests are cleared fields, expanded villages fortified, and wooden halls grow larger, heavier with the weight of decision. And among the Franks, a young war leader rises who sees beyond the next raid or winter. A man shaped by violence, yet attentive to signs, omens, and opportunity. And as rivers are crossed and rival kings fall, the Franks begin to understand the power of belief as much as the power of steel, because belief binds what swords alone cannot. And in the echoing silence, after battle, prayers are whispered not only to old gods, but to a new, distant faith carried by Roman priests, monks, and captives, whose words speak of one God, one truth, one crown under heaven. And when baptism comes, It is not a gentle moment, but a political thunderclap, cold water poured over a warrior king, while thousands watch and feel history shift beneath their feet. Torches flare, church bells ring, where once only war horns sounded, and the Franks step into a new identity, neither fully Roman nor pagan, but something forged between altar and battlefield, and with faith comes legitimacy, law-written words, and the idea that rule can be inherited, not seized every time. With blood, marketplaces swell with traders carrying salt, wine, cloth, and iron. Monasteries rise beside rivers, their stone walls glowing at dawn, while scribes scratch ink onto parchment, preserving laws, names, and memory as winter storms batter roofs and summer sun ripens grain. The Frankish world tightens its grip on Gaul, transforming chaos into structure without losing its brutal edge. Because violence does not vanish, it is simply directed, and now wars are fought for kingdoms, not survival, and alliances sealed with marriage oaths and gold. And in this age the sound of forging grows louder, not only shaping weapons, but shaping a civilization. And as the camera drifts over baptisms, battlefields, crowded courts, and candlelit churches, the truth becomes unavoidable that medieval Europe is taking form not quietly but through fire, faith, and the will of a people who have learned how to turn conquest into continuity. As generations pass, the Frankish realm stretches wider, heavier, with land, law, and expectation, and the raw energy of conquest begins to harden into the weight of rule, where kings must now govern as well as fight, and the world they command is vast and uneven, bound together by muddy roads, rivers, and loyalty, sworn in echoing halls. And at the center of this growing order stands a ruler whose presence reshapes Europe, itself a king who walks among scholars, priests, and warriors with equal authority, and whose court feels less like a battlefield camp and more like the heart of a new world. As winter frost creeps across stone palaces and summer light spills through high windows, messengers arrive from distant coasts and mountains, carrying news, tribute, and fear, and within candlelit chambers, maps are unrolled, not drawn with precision, but imagined through memory and ambition, because this is an age where power is still personal, where a ruler's strength lies in his voice, his sword, and his ability to inspire loyalty across cultures, languages, and old tribal borders. And under this rule, learning stirs once more. Monks copy ancient texts by firelight, their fingers stained with ink, while outside iron rings on anvils and cavalry trains in open fields, and the idea of order begins to outweigh the instinct of raid and plunder. Laws are spoken, then written, standard measures enforced, and coins struck, bearing symbols meant to be recognized across the realm. Marketplaces buzz with voices from many lands, smelling of bread, leather, sweat, and incense, while churches rise taller, their bells cutting through morning mist, calling farmers, soldiers, and nobles alike into a shared rhythm of life. Yet beneath this surface, unity tension never sleeps, because the realm is too large to hold forever. Bound by one will, and succession looms like a shadow as heirs watch, learn, and quietly compete. And when the great ruler fades, the cracks widen, power fragments, and local lords strengthen their grip, turning loyalty into land, and land into authority. Castles sprout from hills like stone teeth, built not against foreign enemies, but against neighbors and brothers. And the Frankish world shifts again, trading unity for survival. As fear and ambition reshape society, peasants work fields under watchful towers. Knights emerge as a new class bound by armor, oath, and horse, and the seeds of feudal life sink deep into European soil. And as the camera moves through silent cloisters, crowded markets, rising castles, and weary villages, the audience feels the truth settle in, that the Franks did not create a perfect empire, but something far more enduring, a framework of power, faith, and social order that will define medieval Europe long after their own unity has shattered, leaving behind not just borders but a way of life that echoes through centuries of stone, steel, and memories. The Frankish world fractures into smaller realms. Its influence does not fade but spreads deeper into the bones of Europe, shaping how people live, work, fight, and believe long after the old unity is gone. And in villages pressed between forests and fields, life settles into a hard, steady rhythm, where dawn begins with the creak of wooden doors, the lowing of cattle, and the smell of bread rising from clay ovens while lords watch from hilltop fortresses, their banners snapping in the wind. And the legacy of the Franks lives not only in bloodlines, but in customs laws and the very structure of daily existence. Knights ride out, armored in iron, and chain their power, rooted in land grants once shaped by Frankish rule, while peasants till soil bound by obligations that echo ancient oaths of loyalty and protection. Churches dominate skylines, their stone walls and bells a reminder of the faith once embraced by warrior kings and carried outward across Europe. Monks preserve learning in cold scriptoria, keeping alive the memory of Rome, filtered through Frankish order, while outside traders cross rivers and passes carrying salt, iron, wine, and stories, binding distant regions into a shared world. And even as new kingdoms rise, bearing different names, their foundations rest on Frankish ideas of authority, inheritance, and law, where power is personal, land-based, and sanctified by faith. The sound of hammer on anvil still rings in towns, producing tools, weapons, and horseshoes essential to survival and war alike. And in markets voices blend in many tongues, yet follow similar rules of trade, coin, and measure born from earlier unity. And the shadows of Frankish influence stretch far into the future, shaping the rise of medieval France, Germany, and beyond. As borders harden but shared traditions remain, and when armies march under new banners, they still fight in formations learned long ago, still swear oaths that mirror ancient bonds, and still seek legitimacy through crown and church, just as the Franks once did. And as the camera drifts across fields, castles, monasteries, and rivers, cutting through the land, the realization settles that the Franks were not merely conquerors of a moment, but architects of continuity, their greatest creation, not an empire, but a pattern of life that survives collapse, adaptation, and time. And in the quiet persistence of stone walls, rural rhythms, and inherited authority, medieval Europe continues to breathe with a Frankish heartbeat long after the names of its founders have faded into legends. The story of the Franks draws toward its final horizon. The echoes of their world continue to move through Europe like a slow, enduring pulse, felt in stone, faith, and memory, rather than in banners or bloodlines. And what began as scattered tribes along forested rivers has become the invisible framework of an entire civilization, where the way power is imagined, the way land is held, And the way authority is justified all carry the imprint of Frankish experience, and in the long twilight of the medieval age their legacy reveals itself not in a single kingdom, but in the shared language of rule that binds Europe together. Castles rise where Roman walls once fell, their thick stone and narrow windows shaped by centuries of conflict rooted in Frankish concepts of defense and lordship, while villages cluster beneath them, living under systems of obligation, protection, and service that trace back to ancient oaths spoken in smoky halls, and faith remains inseparable from power as kings kneel before altars, seeking divine sanction just as early Frankish rulers once did, understanding that belief can steady a realm when swords alone cannot, and across the countryside monasteries stand as quiet witnesses to this inheritance, preserving learning, law, and memory through wars, plagues, and famine, their bells marking time in a world shaped by both heaven and earth. And as trade revives and towns grow, the Frankish influence adapts rather than disappears, giving rise to charters, councils, and early civic freedoms built on foundations of law first stabilized under their rule, and even conflict itself bears their mark as knights, clad in mail and later plate fight, according to codes of honor, loyalty, and landholding that evolved from Frankish warrior traditions, refined over generations, and the soundscape of medieval Europe still carries their presence in the clang of iron, the murmur of prayer, the bustle of markets, and the silence of fields after harvest. And as new nations begin to recognize themselves, France, Germany, and others, they do so standing on ground prepared by Frankish order, language, and custom woven into identity so deeply that it no longer feels foreign or inherited, but natural and inevitable. And the greatest testament to the Franks is not that they ruled, but that they taught Europe how to endure, how to rebuild after collapse, how to bind faith, violence, and governance into a system capable of surviving centuries of upheaval. And as the camera pulls back from candlelit churches, frozen rivers, and ancient roads disappearing into the mist, the conclusion becomes clear that medieval Europe was not forged in a single moment or by a single crown, but through the long, resilient journey of the Franks, whose quiet strength shaped a continent, and whose legacy still lingers in every stone, tower, oath-sworn, and kingdom that rose from the ruins of the Old World.